anxiety about the unknown.
I could hear the steps walking up the stairs. For reals, I was literally
He had
hiding
all
under
black
the bed.
eyes. There was no light in
All of
his
a sudden,
eyes.
this huge object with lights was on top of us, and it made no sound.
The anguish.
She's probably just worried about the life that she just left, about maybe the house.
The fear.
It wasn't like the house itself cracking, but the floorboards next to us cracking.
Yes, this happened.
We would start hearing like footsteps in our bedroom. We would hear whispers, and it just felt, the general feeling kind of started changing. Things started feeling heavier.
Welcome to Yes, This Happened. Today, we bring you the story of an evil entity which apparently grew in intensity as soon as the faith of the new owners of the property began to strengthen. Generally, the purchase of a new house is an event that brings happiness and hope to newlyweds. But in the case of Sabrina and her husband from El Paso, Texas, things turned out to be a little different due to the presence of one such entity.
Well, my story doesn't really begin from one day to the next. It was really something that developed over time, and it all really kind of started when my husband and I had recently gotten married and we were looking for a house to buy. We didn't really want to rent or anything like that. So we had this family friend who was a realtor who was flipping this small house. And this family friend, she used to tell stories about her experiences when she was younger, that she was able to see things, she was able to see spirits, she was able to feel things, etc. Right? And so when we were planning on buying this house that she was flipping, she would tell us things like, oh yeah, I would see things, I would feel things in this house.
The realtor told him she could feel an energy in one of the houses she showed them, a small but beautiful Spanish-style two-story townhouse just off Restless Street in El Paso's west side at the perfect price point. The realtor insisted a couple of times about this feeling she got from the house, but Sabrina and her husband had already made up their minds.
We kind of laughed it off because we knew about her stories. We knew how she was, and we just kind of like, she's being herself, and so we just kind of ignored what she was saying. And so when we finally bought the house and we finally moved in and we moved in all of our furniture, everything was great. There were really no issues for many months. We didn't see anything, we didn't feel anything, we didn't hear anything. It was just all pretty calm, normal house. Then one day, my husband and I we started talking in the living room, and it was a conversation that was very deep, very theological, and we stayed talking in the living room very, very late at night. I would dare say maybe about 2 or 3 in the morning, that we just had this very long conversation about God and religion and the supernatural, and it was just a very filling conversation. It was just nice, we were both telling each other like our thoughts and what we were thinking, and it was just a very nice conversation. And so when we realized it was super late, we're like, oh man, let's go to sleep. We got to go to sleep, right? And so we turned off the living room light and started going up the stairs to her bedroom, kind of in the darkness. I guess you could see some light from outside, maybe like a street light or something. But we were going upstairs in the dark, somewhat in the dark. And as we were halfway up the stairs, we noticed, or we didn't notice, it happened. Our living room light turned on, and we kind of like both stopped in the middle and looked at each other, and we're like, what happened? And then it turned on maybe for about 2 or 3 seconds, and then it turned back off. So we kind of were like, what was that? And then we shrugged it off like, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's a short or something. We'll look into it. And that was the only time it happened, and it never happened before, and it never happened again, but that was weird. And so due to that conversation, my husband and I kind of began to be a little bit more involved in our church. We went more often, and we prayed more, and we prayed at home. We prayed before bedtime. And as we were developing our, I guess, spiritual or religious well-being, things started happening in our house. So at night, for example, when we would pray before getting into bed, we would both kneel and pray, we would start hearing like footsteps in our bedroom. Now our house was built like in the 70s, and it is an old house, and we just kind of started thinking, well, it's probably the temperature, the temperature change makes the wood crack, and so that's kind of what's happening. Or we try to convince ourselves that that's what it was. But deep down inside, I know he knew that, no, they sound like steps. It sounds like when we were stepping, and it sounded like it was next to us. It wasn't like the house itself cracking, but the floorboards next to us cracking. So it was a little bit unnerving, to say the least, but we were still doing what we were doing.
Yes, this happened.
As time passed, the physical manifestations in their home started to become more intense and more personal, making both Sabrina and her husband start to feel uncomfortable and scared in their own home.
We would hear whispers, and it just felt, the general feeling kind of started changing. Things started feeling heavier around the house. It's hard to describe. It was just a feeling that we had. But we continued. We continued our prayers and developing our customs, going to church, etc. So, eventually my husband and I started having like nightmares, right? I started having nightmares, and they were repeating. They were basically the same type of nightmare, which meant like it was like me against the house, right? So the dream was like the house was speaking to me, and I was like fighting against it. It's just kind of hard to describe, but that's what it was. Like it was speaking and I was like fighting back, and it was just very stressful. And it happened like 2 or 3 times. And then I remember telling my husband, like, you know what, like I've been having these dreams and I've just been very nervous about it. And he turned around. I remember he turned around and looked at me, and he's like, I've had the same exact dream. So that's when we realized, like, oh, we're both having the same experiences and the same dreams and hearing the same things. And we started talking about it. So we were pretty nervous at that point. And one night, my husband was also working on his master's degree during this time. So he would stay up late doing homework or studying, turning in his assignments and his papers and all that. And so I would sometimes just go to sleep before him. I would just go to bed while he would stay downstairs in our office in the computer working on his assignments. So one night he came up and he woke me up. And which was weird because he was always very careful about trying not to wake me up. He would always be quiet when he would come up and get to bed, get ready to go to bed. He would, try to be as quiet as possible. to not wake me up. And this time he woke me up, he shook me, and he woke me up and he said, we need to call the priest tomorrow. And I'm like, wait, what happened? What happened? And he said, I heard a very angry sigh coming from the specific corner of the house, which was typically very dark because it wouldn't get any natural light in that specific corner of the house. And he said he was passing by it. He had finished his work. He was passing by it. He was getting ready to come upstairs to go to bed. And as he was passing by, he heard this angry sigh. Like...
Paranormal entities manifest themselves in many different ways. They might use sound, sight, touch, electrical fields, or even influence emotions to make themselves known.
You know, I'm trying to describe it, but I'm sure it was worse because he's not a scaredy cat. He doesn't really get scared very much, and that time he really felt scared. It was like he described it as a hate kind of sound. So he woke me up and he told me all this, and he said, we need to call the priest tomorrow. And I did. I called the priest the next day, and he came over maybe a couple of days after that, and he performed like a small exorcism, a small prayer in Latin. Now, it's not like you see in the movies where things started flying off the shelves and, or anything like that. But it did kind of work. He went around the whole house with holy water, saying the small Latin prayer, and he left. And after he left, everything just felt lighter, like you could breathe better. And I remember sitting on the couch and just feeling like relief. And ever since that moment, or ever since that day where the priest came and did perform that small exorcism, nothing happened after that. Like, there were no more sounds, no more whispers, no more steps, nothing. Everything was normal, like it was when we first moved in. We continued doing our prayers, we continued with our spiritual life, and it was peace after that. And well, then we had our children and we had to grow. Our house had to get bigger. So we did move out after that, but it was an experience I'll never forget.
Had they heeded the realtor's advice about the unfriendly entity in that house, Sabrina and her husband might have never had to experience the anxiety of witnessing these manifestations in their own home. Were these events the result of an overactive imagination? Was the couple feeding off each other? Or was it really an evil spirit reacting to their growth in faith? Or a previous deceased owner? We will never know. Sabrina's testimony remains with us as proof of what could be paranormal events that transcended their dimension to meet us at ours. What do you think? On the next episode of Yes, This Happened. They bought a new house in West Texas.
He told us that the house was being sold by a widower because his wife had died recently at a very young age, that she had gotten ill all of a sudden, and that 2 weeks after she passed away. So it was a really fast illness and a really fast death.
But during their Thanksgiving dinner, an uninvited guest shows up.
And so my husband and I invited my sister-in-law with her husband to Thanksgiving dinner, and another couple that we know from church, and my father-in-law, who is a widower. And of course, my 3 boys, who were 12, 14, and 16 at the time. My father-in-law got up and went over to the kitchen. He was taking some plates in And when he got to the kitchen, he looked out the window. We have a big window over the kitchen sink, and it looks out into a closed porch and then the patio area. And when he was there looking out the window, he saw that there was a young lady right in front of the window, but she was looking out into the patio area, so she had her back to him. But then when he went into the kitchen, she started to turn around, and they met. They saw each other face to face, and he smiled and she smiled. And he said, hello. And she said, hello. And so my father-in-law said, hey, are you related to so-and-so? This young lady that was outside on the porch area said, no, I'm not related. And then the young lady just kind of smiled, and then she turned again toward the patio area, and she gave him her back again. And then all of a sudden she just turned and started walking out to what my father-in-law thought was the side gate of the patio, and apparently he thought she walked out.
And the visions of a father-in-law help find her identity.
And I said, no, we are the only persons here. And then my sister-in-law turned around and said, Dad, don't start. And by that, she meant that he was always saying that he saw people that nobody else saw, that he would speak to people who apparently were dead, but he could speak to them. I mean, he had these things going on, and this wasn't the first time that this had happened to him. Apparently, he goes through these things like several times a year. So anyway, he said, well, I'm sorry, but I just spoke to somebody out there,
On the next episode of Yes, This Happened.